Good evening, everyone. I am Chris, and this is really late for me, actually. I wanted to do this announcement video and just a bit of a discussion because some kind of major Lord of the Rings movie news broke. I'm going to be really busy over this weekend, and this is really my only free chance to do it. I do need to be up for work in about 8 hours' time, so there's still time, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. So this kind of broke a few hours ago, really. Probably, well, I don't know, like earlier this evening when I got back from work, I saw the news that Warner Brothers have announced a slew of new Lord of the Rings films, or their plans to release a whole bunch of Lord of the Rings films. And we have the name for the next one. Now, obviously, we have the War of the Rohirrim, which is meant to be coming out later this year in December. That's the animated movie, the anime style one, which I'm actually really curious for, and I hope it's really good. But as far as I know, this is going to be a live action one. And their new one that they've announced is going to be, well, it's slated for a 2026 release. And as you can see from the title, it's got the working title of The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum. With a whole bunch of original cast members and you know, directors and crew and everything slated to come back for it, including Andy Serkis, unsurprisingly, as Gollum. And he's also going to direct as well, so it's starring and directed by Andy Serkis. And also you've got the likes of Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, and Philippa Boyens returning as well as producers, and I'm assuming writers as well on this thing. So it's pretty big news. It kind of was very surprising to me. I know that Warner Brothers definitely want to double down on the Lord of the Rings brand, and they see it as a cash cow. They've adapted the Lord of the Rings. They've adapted the Hobbit trilogy, and it's like, where else can we go? Well, the film rights to the Silmarillion are still owned by the Tolkien estate, so we can't do anything with the Silmarillion, but what we can do is mine all of the appendices from this book. And yeah, that seems exactly what they're going to do. So I'm going to read through the Variety article. I know this is like a really, really late live stream, so I don't know if anyone's going to tune in and comment along on this thing, but I'm just going to kind of voice my opinions, and hopefully you guys can comment at a later date or when you check out this video, because I'd love to hear your opinions on this as well. So, as I said, this is the Variety article. Warner Brothers to release new Lord of the Rings movie, The Hunt for Gollum, in 2026. Peter Jackson to produce and Andy Serkis to direct. So I'm going to read through the article, and I'm going to kind of pause and offer my own insight and thoughts and positives and concerns that I might have for this whole project and what Warner Brothers are doing with this thing. So Warner Brothers will release the first of its new batch of live-action The Lord of the Rings films in 2026, which will focus on Andy Serkis' Gollum. Now, I remember an article from a while back that said that they want to focus on Gandalf, they want to focus on Aragorn, and they want to focus on Gollum. And I think they may have announced more names, but those were certainly some of the names they were throwing around for characters that they wanted to focus on and to do spin-offs on. And I remember reading that thinking, oh god, here we go. We're doing the Disney oversaturation, you know, spin-offs and just diluting down what made the other stuff great. Now, you could argue, you know, moving on to the next paragraph, I'll read this first and then kind of go into my criticism again. Original The Lord of the Rings trilogy filmmaker Peter Jackson and his partners Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens are producing the movie and, quote, will be involved every step of the way, end quote. Warner Brothers Discovery CEO David Zaslav said during an earnings call on Thursday. Now, the prospect of the original crew returning, of course, Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, to many would be a good thing. And, you know, ask me any other time, and I would say, yeah, of course, you know, the people that helped create the best trilogy ever made and will ever see in the history of film, absolutely. But then we also saw the Hobbit trilogy. Now, I know all of the blame doesn't fall at Peter Jackson for that. There was a whole bunch of other stuff going on with the studio. The issue is, this is still the same studio. This ain't New Line Cinema anymore. You know, it's not that original company. This is Warner Brothers. And we've seen all the kinds of shit that Warner Brothers can do. And it likes to meddle. And, you know, if you just look at the DC EU, for example, what happened with that, and even just keeping it with Middle-earth, let's look at the Hobbit trilogy and what happened with that, and a lot of the decisions that they made, and they overruled Peter Jackson on. So just the fact that the original crew members are coming back and are going to have some part in producing the film or writing the film, maybe, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be automatically good. We've seen a lot of examples of the original creators of an IP coming back and the product being less than satisfying. Look at James Cameron, for example, with the Terminator franchise with Terminator Dark Fate. And I think he even had a hand in Genesis as well, didn't he? So, you know, look at Ridley Scott with Prometheus and Alien Covenant. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be automatically a good thing. It does help kind of give a sense of getting the team back together and a step in the right direction, that they're keeping them in the loop, and apparently, you know, they're going to be present every step of the way. They're going to be involved every step of the way. And it would be nice to see Peter Jackson in a producing role rather than directorial role, because, you know, he didn't want to direct the Hobbit films, and he kind of joined, you know, he kind of tentatively joined as director just to, I don't know, steer the ship, I guess, you know, because he felt obliged to, rather than it being a passion project. So, and it's nice to see Andy Serkis getting the reins to direct. He's directed a number of films before, including Venom 2 and a few other ones. But it's nice to see Andy Serkis's journey within Middle-earth, because it is very much the film franchise that started his career, and, you know, with motion capture technology and everything like that, it really pushed that side of things with Andy Serkis. And then through The Hobbit, he was a second unit director, and then from that he's now a full-blown director in and of himself. So it's nice to see him get the reins of this, and he clearly has an understanding for the character, having, you know, served this character and performed as this character for many number of years now. He's performed the audio books as well for Tolkien, so he does have an intimate knowledge of Tolkien, and also directing. He's had enough projects underneath his belt now where I'm sure he can do a great job with this, and it's in safe hands that he has taken it upon himself to direct this film when it's, I won't say it's his character, because of course it's Tolkien's character, but he's put so much of himself into that role for all of these years that I do believe he has a firm grasp of that character and what's needed to bring this character to the big screen again. And he's still got it. Like, he can absolutely still do it, and it'll be cool to see how far the technology's advanced for Gollum, even since the Hobbit trilogy, because if you look at how Gollum looked in the Lord of the Rings films compared to the Hobbit, the advance in those however many years it was immense. So, you know, there's been even more years now since the Hobbit, so we could see even, you know, the technology pushed even further. So continuing on through the article, the project is currently in the early stages of script development from writers Walsh and Boynes, along with Phoebe Gittins and Artie Papageorgiou. I can't pronounce that last name. And will, quote, explore storylines yet to be told, Zaslav said. Well, if it is the hunt for Gollum, we're going to go into a bit of the lore in just a second, and my concerns and kind of questions that I have about this project and how it's going to fit into what we know and what we've seen before. In a press release from Warner Brothers later Thursday morning, the studio revealed that the working title for the film is The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum. You gotta get that name, The Lord of the Rings, in there, you know, just to get bums in seats. It's a recognisable IP. You see everything doing it. The new Furiosa film that's coming out in a couple of weeks. Furiosa, subtitle, a Mad Max saga. You know, you've got to get that recognisable IP name in there, haven't you? There was that Hunger Games movie that came out, the prequel, whatever it was. What is it? Serpents and whatever it was called. I don't know if anyone went to see it. It didn't really make waves, I don't think. But then it was like a Hunger Games story or whatever it was. Solo, a Star Wars story. They all do it. So you got to get the Lord of the Rings in there. The working title is The Lord of the Rings, The Hunt for Gollum, and it will be directed by Andy Serkis in his iconic titular role. The film will be executive produced by Ken Kamins, with Serkis and the Imaginarium's Jonathan Cavendish. Warner Brothers first announced in February 2023 that then newly installed studio leaders Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi had brokered a deal to, quote, to make, quote, multiple, end quote, films based on the beloved J.R.R. Tolkien books. The projects will be developed through Warner Brothers label New Line Cinema. Free Mode, a division of Embracer Group, made the adaptive rights deal for books including The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit under a venture named Middle-earth Enterprises. Oh, that just kind of kills me to see that name, Middle-earth Enterprises. You know, it's what's the quote from Jurassic Park with Jeff Goldblum, where he says, you know, you put it on a lunchbox, you sold it, and now you're selling it. You're selling it. It feels like that to me. This is all very consumerist, and the prospect of multiple Lord of the Rings films being released. I mean, on the one hand, it'll be cool to see certain stories adapted. Hopefully lesser known stories from the appendices kind of brought to life a little bit more, but also the oversaturation and the quality that could suffer from, you know, just cranking out a whole bunch of films. I feel like it might diminish the greatness of the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I hope isn't the case, but we will see. Let's continue reading just a second. A separate animated Middle-earth movie, The Lord of the Rings, The War of the Rohirrim, is due on December the 13th via Warner Brothers and directed by Kenji Kamiyama. I think that's how you pronounce his name. That movie is set 200 years before the events of The Hobbit. Yeah, and The War of the Rohirrim is going to be based on the tale of Helm Hammerhand. So it feels like they're doing spin-offs of all of these things that are mentioned in The Lord of the Rings. At Helm's Deep, you have the statue of Helm Hammerhand. And of course you have the horn of Helm Hammerhand, the horn that he blew to announce his coming and that he was on the warpath. And Helm Hammerhand is a tough guy. He will literally beat someone to death with his bare hands. Seaworld Man says willing to do a devoted Star Wars posters video. What do you mean by that? I only have one. I only have one Star Wars poster. Unless you talk about, you know, reviewing all of the Star Wars posters, I guess. Maybe. Quote, for over 2 decades, moviegoers have embraced the Lord of the Rings film trilogy because of the undeniable devotion Peter, Fran, and Philippa have shown towards protecting the legacy of Tolkien's works, and to ensure audiences could experience the incredible world he created in a way that honours his literary vision, DeLuca and Abdi said in a statement Thursday. Quote, we are honoured that they have agreed, I think that should be agreed to be. They have agreed to be our partners on these 2 new films. With Andy coming aboard to direct The Lord of the Rings The Hunt for Gollum, we continue an important commitment to excellence that is a true hallmark of how we all want to venture ahead and further contribute to the Lord of the Rings cinematic history. Yeah, you know, you read statements like that, and I've been burnt before with stuff like this. You know, it's just empty words. This is all business shit. This is all telling the people what they want to hear. This is all conjecture at the moment. I'm going to have to see trailers. I'm going to have to see stills. I'm going to have more of an idea of how they're going to integrate these into the films, if at all, or if it's going to be its own thing. With Andy Serkis coming back as Gollum, then that tells me that this is going to be grounded within the movie canon. And we'll talk about, you know, there's obviously a lot of discrepancies between the movie canon and what's in the book, which is going to be very confusing when it comes to the placement of this particular story, because we'll talk about the Hunt for Gollum in just a second, how it pertains to the book, and how it's going to be very difficult to do that within what the film presents us. So yeah, we'll go into that in just a second. Jackson, Walsh and Boyens added, quote, it is an honour and a privilege to travel back to Middle-earth with our good friend and collaborator Andy Serkis, who has unfinished business with that stinker Gollum. As lifelong fans of Professor Tolkien's vast mythology, we are proud to be working with Mike DeLuca, Pam Abdi and the entire team at Warner Brothers on another epic adventure. I'm actually really surprised that Peter Jackson came back, because, my God, the Hobbit trilogy aged Peter Jackson. It felt like that film studio took everything out of him, and he was just like a broken shell of a man. And that's why he kind of took a leave of absence from directing like feature films, and did a lot of his passion projects and documentary films. He did the They Shall Not Grow Old World War I documentary, which I really enjoyed, and then his Beatles one, which I haven't seen. I'm not a massive Beatles fan. That might be quite controversial. And the prospect of watching 4+ hours of Beatles stuff, however interesting it could be, you know, with some very, you know, behind the scenes stuff that not, you know, some Beatles fans probably haven't seen, I can imagine that being a very enticing prospect. But to me, I haven't gone to it yet, and I should do, because I have watched everything Peter Jackson's ever made, and that's the only thing that I haven't. So it's on the back burner. I will get around to it at some point. I'm sure it's a great documentary. It's just the subject matter not really fussed about. But yeah, he hasn't produced a feature film since the Battle of the Five Armies, and I'm not surprised. As I say, it felt like it took everything out of him, and I'm surprised he's going back to this. I know he's not directing it, but producing it, and even going back to the Lord of the Rings. What's interesting to note is that the Rings of Power mentioned that they'd contacted Peter Jackson to either get his blessing or to help him like script some ideas or to pen some screenplays for some of the episodes. And then Peter Jackson said, well, you know, they called me. I said, oh, I think they wanted him on board, I think, didn't they? And he says, like, well, you know, send me the scripts over. I'll read the scripts first, and then I'll decide if I want to be a part of it. And then they just ghosted him, and he never received those scripts, and he never got another phone call back, which is quite telling. So yeah, the fact that he is all gung-ho for this tells me that maybe Warner Brothers this time have learnt from their mistakes with the Hobbit trilogy and will give Andy Serkis and the crew the time that he needs to create the film that he needs. I don't see this being a trilogy. I see this just being a standalone film, as they've done with The War of the Rohirrim, The Hunt for Gollum, and then they're probably going to do like a whole bunch more of them. I think these films should all just be like a one and done, like separate little adventures in Middle-earth. Seaward Man says, you've had your shelf for how long? A long time. I haven't really added up the years of how long I've had my shelf. It's been a while. So this is a quote from Andy Serkis now. He says, yes, precious. I can't do a Gollum voice, I'm sorry. I'm just going to read it. Yes, precious. Serkis said, the time has come once more to venture into the unknown with my dear friends, the extraordinary and incomparable guardians of Middle-earth, Peter, Fran and Philippa, with Mike and Pam and the Warner Brothers team on the quest as well, alongside Weta and our filmmaking family in New Zealand. It's just all too delicious. The original Lord of the Rings trilogy, helmed by Jackson, grossed nearly $3 billion worldwide. Jackson's follow-up trilogy, based on Tolkien's The Hobbit, matched those grosses. Adjusted for inflation, I'm not sure. Jackson's first Lord of the Rings trilogy starred Elijah Wood, Ian McKellen, Liv Tyler, Viggo Mortensen, Sean Astin and Cate Blanchett. That trio of films was nominated for 30 Academy Awards and took home 17 trophies, including Best Picture for 2003's The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It should have won all of the Oscars. It should have got all of them for everything. Every single one of those films should have won Best Picture every single year, as far as I'm concerned. And that's the article, right? So that's all the information we have to go off. So we have, let's recap of what we know already. Andy Serkis is directing, tentative 2026 release date. Peter Jackson, Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens returning to produce. That's it. And we know it's tentatively called The Hunt for Gollum. Now, let's address The Hunt for Gollum for a second. So, if it's The Hunt for Gollum, which I'm pretty sure it will be, and yes, I do have the tome here. I am going to be that guy on YouTube that has, you know, is talking about this at 12:30 in the AM, and I'm going to go to the appendices right here. So, The Hunt for Gollum, as it pertains to the book, oh, sorry, we've got a comment here. Toby says, Viggo returning? If not, then who do you think will be cast as young Strider? Yes, now our main players of characters here, our main trio, will be Gollum, Aragorn, and Gandalf. I'm just going to go over sort of when it takes place in the book and, you know, talk about the main players of this and how this is going to be very difficult when it comes to making a film of it, especially a film that is meant to, what I assume, take place in the main trilogy that we know. So, in the book, in the year... Oh my god, I'm going to be that guy. I'm so being that guy right now. I'm just nerding out so hard right now, and I don't care. So, we're in the Third Age with this, okay? So, 3001, pretty much exactly the same as the movie. You have Bilbo's birthday, his 111th birthday. You have the moment where Bilbo disappears, and Gandalf suspects that the ring that Bilbo has is probably the One Ring, or he's very, he's highly suspicious about it. And he leaves. He leaves to go and, questions that need answering, and he fucks off in the movie exactly like he does in the book. And Gandalf, during this time, it's very fleetingly mentioned in the film. He's like, I looked everywhere for the creature Gollum, but the enemy found him first. That's the hunt for Gollum, basically. It's Gandalf, with the help of Aragorn, searching high and low for signs of Gollum and information from Gollum. That's it. Now, in the book, this span of time of Gandalf looking for Gollum takes an exceedingly large amount of time. A long, long time. So, Gandalf leaves the Shire in 3001, and he seeks for news of Gollum and calls on the help of Aragorn. So I've always liked that, because Gandalf and Aragorn in the movie do have that camaraderie with each other and respect for each other. Gandalf initially, when the Fellowship leave Rivendell, is the main leader of the group, and that leadership falls on Aragorn's shoulders after Khazad-dûm, basically. And you can see that connection between the two of them, and that leadership role. And it's nice to know when you've read the book, it kind of enhances the watching of the film, going, oh, okay, they bombed off on that adventure together, in the hunt for Gollum. And it brings those two characters a bit closer together, in my opinion. Then over the next few years, like the next 4 years or so, Gandalf just kind of periodically returns to the Shire, just to check in with Frodo, and just sporadically over the next 4 years he just shows up and chats with Frodo, I guess, as he's still seeking information on the ring, and more importantly looking for Gollum. And he pays his last visit to Frodo in 3008, so that's 7 years since Bilbo's birthday, and that's the last time that he pays his visit to Frodo at that point. Then from 3009 to 3017, so a huge amount of years there, a huge amount of years. It says, this is the Tale of Years, by the way, in Appendix B. Gandalf and Aragorn renew their hunt for Gollum at intervals during the next 8 years, searching in the Vales of Anduin, Mirkwood, and Rhovanion to the confines of Mordor. At some time during these years, Gollum himself ventured into Mordor and was captured by Sauron. And then it just mentions that Elrond sends for Arwen, and she returns to Imladris, and the mountains and all lands eastward are becoming dangerous. So that kind of presents the backdrop there. Now I'm reading that thinking, like, oh my god, are they going to bring like Hugo Weaving Elrond back into it, and Arwen? If it is a case of, getting the whole gang back together kind of thing, and Arwen hasn't aged a day, to quote Gandalf. Elrond, they could do some digital de-aging on him, I'm sure, like they did in The Hobbit. But yeah, the main thing is those locations that's mentioned in the 8 years, searching in the Vales of Anduin, Mirkwood, and Rhovanion. So right there, Mirkwood, and that's going to be a very important location in just a second, brings into question we could get Lee Pace back as Thranduil, and we could see the Woodland Realm again from The Hobbit. So those could be main locations there. Another thing we need to remember is that this time span in the book is dragged out exceedingly more than it is in the film that we see. As I mentioned, it's about 16 to 17 years here in the book. Whereas in the movie, when Gandalf leaves, and then, he goes to Minas Tirith, and he goes to the libraries, and he researches the One Ring and the account of Isildur, and then he comes back to the Shire, you get the impression that this all took place in, like, maybe a month or two. Like a handful of months, tops. It goes by very, very quickly, and you don't get that huge expanse of time. So if this is being adapted to fit in between that part in the film, I would assume that, like the Lord of the Rings movies themselves, you're going to have to play with the narrative, the chronology, and the narrative amount of time. Things are going to have to be condensed for the sake of adaptation and for a movie. If this is like a 2.5 hour to 3 hour movie, however long it's going to be, you're not really going to have to be, and then there was a 4-year time jump, and then there was an 8-year time jump. Like, stuff's got to happen, and it's got to all happen in a relatively the same amount of time as what we're seeing on screen, I would imagine. You might get some like traveling montages thrown in there and everything like that for good measure, but I don't think it's going to be jumping certainly the amount of time that's required for this. And then, yeah, in 3017, Gollum is released from Mordor. He is taken by Aragorn in the Dead Marshes and brought to Thranduil in Mirkwood. And then Gandalf visits Minas Tirith and reads the Scroll of Isildur. Now, that's the part in the movie that we've seen, is Minas Tirith and the account of Isildur. So, yeah, we will probably see Mirkwood again if they're sticking to that, which I hope they do. We will see Mirkwood again. We'll see the Woodland Realm. You can get Lee Pace back. And does that mean we're going to get Legolas again? I hope not, but they crowbarred him into the Hobbit trilogy, but there is a way where they could get Legolas in there. Now, already the Hobbit, well, even the Lord of the Rings films have proposed differences compared to the source material and the narrative and the timeline of everything, but the Hobbit trilogy even more so. What I'm worried about is if you cast your mind back to the end of Battle of the Five Armies, you have the scene where, after the battle's all said and done, you have the scene of Thranduil going to his son Legolas and kind of sending him off on a bit of a side quest, saying, go north, there is a ranger amongst their ranks, you should meet him. His father Aragorn was a great man. His true name you must discover for yourself. And that kind of teases a buddy duo road trip movie almost of Legolas and Aragorn. And if you're going to compare that to the book's timeline, then that makes no sense at all, because narratively, at that point, Aragorn should be about 10 years old. But the movie skips out that 17 years gap of Gandalf disappearing and returning, and everything's, the timeline's much more truncated. So in the movie continuity during that time of The Hobbit, Aragorn would be about 20. So that checks out. So that kind of tells me, are they going to go with a young Aragorn? And are they going to mess with the timeline of this thing of when this hunt for Gollum took place? I don't see how it can, because in The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, Gandalf quite obviously states, I looked everywhere for the creature Gollum, but the enemy found him first. And that's the only place it can take place. So it needs to be Viggo Mortensen, really, if this is going to tie in with the movies. And this is, with Andy Serkis coming back as Gollum, that tells me, and, the original cast and crew, this tells me that it has to take place within the movie continuity, and therefore we need Viggo to return. The ultimate question is, will he? Because he was asked to return for the Hobbit trilogy, and he basically told them to jog on. He's like, my character isn't in the book, I'm not coming back for that. And you do get the sense that Viggo has a reverence for the source material, and he really respects it. And he wouldn't come back for something that he feels is beneath him or is of the quality of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And let's be fair, nothing ever will be of that same quality. So if they can't get him back, and even if they could get him back, let me check real quick how old Viggo Mortensen is now. I know they have the power of digital de-aging and things like that, but he's got to be up there. He's 65 years old. And it's... I know the character's meant to be, like 87, probably around this time, maybe in his 70s, wouldn't he? But I don't want to see an Aragorn that old. Like, could you imagine if they got him back and put him in the same costume and he just looked really... And people have done it with prequels before. If you look at Better Call Saul, the Breaking Bad prequel, they didn't digitally de-age anyone, and you just meant to go, oh, well, this is meant to be set before, even though the actors really look noticeably a lot older. Even Legolas, yeah, they did try and digitally de-age him and do whatever kind of crazy digital shit they did to him, and, his bright blue eyes. But he still looked a hell of a lot older. And some people can go with it and just suspend their disbelief. I wouldn't be able to do that. I feel like Viggo Mortensen's past that point now. And also, the main player, Ian McKellen, Sir Ian McKellen as Gandalf. If this is going to take place in the movie continuity, Gandalf searching high and low for Gollum is the hunt for Gollum. He and Aragorn together are the two main players when it comes to hunting for Gollum. I also don't see the infatuation of the game studios and now the movie studios as well, trying to push a Gollum spin-off. Of all the stories they could tell in the appendices, they could go anywhere. They have the rights to the appendices. Why are they infatuated with Gollum? It's not... I don't think Gollum can really carry a film as the lead. Gollum serves the story as a smaller part of a bigger whole, as a supporting character. And I don't think he can work as a... I was going to say first-person character. I don't mean it in that way, but as the main lead, Gollum helming a movie. People like Gollum. He's a cool character. He's a fascinating character. But is the film going to be from his perspective? Because if that's the case, we've had a game that came out about that, and it was absolutely awful. And I questioned why they would ever make something like that. You even have Gandalf's interrogation of Gollum at the Woodland Realm in that game, so it's going to be very much set around that same kind of timeline, I think. Let me just go to some of the comments right now, and thank you to everyone that's keeping the conversation going, by the way. Sorry. JX Editor says, does this end in Mirkwood like the books, or does it end in Barad-dûr like the movie? Fascinating question. As a hypothetical question, I really don't know. I feel like they would take the opportunity to show us Barad-dûr, to show his initial capture. In the book, it's heavily implied that Sauron himself was the one that tortured Gollum. I think Gollum makes mention of his 9 fingers or something like that. Obviously, Sauron has his ring finger cut off, doesn't he? So in the book, Sauron has a physical presence, has a body, is probably there in person torturing Gollum for information. I believe the BBC radio play opens with that interrogation, I think, if I remember rightly, Sauron interrogating Gollum. I think it would probably be Barad-dûr, I'm pretty sure, and then Gollum escaping, and that's how it would end. As I say, I don't see them dragging this out over a few movies. I think this needs to be one and done. I really do. I don't think they can... I don't think there's enough material there to drag it out for that long. And there's a lot of artistic liberty they need to take, of course. So I've mentioned the key events there, but it's just like, oh, over the course of the next 8 years, Aragorn and Gandalf continued their search for Gollum. You can't just do that. You know, you're going to have to fill it with new characters and new dialogue that isn't written in the book. But all the blueprints are there for what you need to do. I just don't know how they're going to go about doing it. And similar to Viggo Mortensen in terms of age, Christ almighty, God bless him, Sir Ian McKellen. He mentioned, I think, not long ago, that he really wants to play Gandalf again. He wants like a last hurrah as Gandalf, and he was phenomenal in the Hobbit films. He's one of the best parts. Obviously, of course he is. He's Sir Ian McKellen. And it would be great to have him back. They'd have to do a lot of digital de-aging on him, and there'd have to be like a lot of body double stuff with him. Maybe they could film him in close-ups, and again, similar to what they did with The Hobbit. But it's been a long time since the Hobbit films came out, and, you know, Ian McKellen's not getting any younger either. None of us are. But do I want to see a film that recasts Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn and recasts Ian McKellen as Gandalf, but keeps Andy Serkis as Gollum? That's going to be weird to me. If you're going to do a Hunt for Gollum movie, and you want to retain the original actors in whatever capacity you can, stick with what you're doing with The War of the Rohirrim. Go animated. Lord of the Rings kind of started out in terms of its adaptations, its main adaptations, with animation. You had the Rankin Bass movies, the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings, and then you had the Return of the King animated movie. So it did start out in animation very much. And with the War of the Rohirrim going to an anime style, I think there's a lot of creative freedom you can do with that. They're even bringing Miranda Otto back as Éowyn to supply the voice. I'm assuming she's going to be some kind of narrator with that film. This would be your chance to do that, to have another animated film. You could really make it visually interesting and do it, especially with Gollum, and do a lot of cool things with it. And you could get Ian McKellen back to do the voice. You could get Viggo Mortensen to play Aragorn again, and of course you can get Andy Serkis as Gollum again. I think that would be the best way to go about it, but it's not going to be that. It's going to be live action. So I think the way that they're going to have to go is a recast, but then that's just going to really muddy the waters of the continuity. It's going to be that kind of like X-Men film kind of thing where each one, it's almost like a loose continuity, or like a James Bond thing where you have some people returning but it doesn't really follow on, but you kind of in your mind go, oh well, this is meant to take place here. Try not to think about it too much. There's a recast here, there's a new appearance here, but this thing remains the same. It might be like that, and I don't know if that's what I want from my Hunt for Gollum movie. Yeah. Anyway, I'll get to more of you guys' comments. JX says, if Thranduil is in it, maybe Aragorn can ask, why do you send your son to visit me when I was 10? As I say, they set it up with the Hobbit films. They set it up. It's all there. Toby says, you're doing a good job selling this movie. Thanks for citing the book. Wasn't aware that the potential story would include elements from both stories, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely potential there to see all these locations and new locations. Another angle that we could look at is that the Ringwraiths are out as well, I believe, at that point, hunting for things. So maybe there could be a parallel story. It's the Hunt for Gollum. It could be, you know, Aragorn and Gandalf hunting Gollum, but it could also be the Ringwraiths hunting as well for Shire Baggins. So you could have potential storylines there. In terms of like a main villain though, Gollum could kind of fit that role as like an anti-hero kind of character, but if you're going to have like a definitive bad guy, it could be Sauron, but that's really at the end of the film, isn't it, where he he tortures Gollum and whatnot. So maybe not. The Ringwraiths could make a return, or they could create a new villain completely out of whole cloth, which I talked about artistic liberties, and artistic liberties can go one of two ways. So I don't know. JX says Legolas was the one in charge of Gollum's continued incarceration. Yeah, and it depends how far they go, because he's captured again, isn't he? And he's held in the Woodland Realm for a long time, and then I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, there's an orc attack on the Woodland Realm which kind of prompts Gollum's escape. There's a bit of a distraction, I guess, and Gollum is able to escape. I think that's during the events of the Lord of the Rings though, isn't it? So I think actually it might be after that hunt for Gollum, if I remember rightly. I think they talk about him escaping the Woodland Realm. Let's see. Toby says, could be a great way to mend the cracks between the two trilogies. Curious to see what Andy S has in store. Yeah, and I think a big thing that they need to think about, and hopefully that they've learned from The Hobbit, is to not rely on CGI. I think a lot of that was probably Peter Jackson's obsession with technology. It's almost like the George Lucasification. You know, I went to see Phantom Menace yesterday. A couple of days ago, and that's kind of what happened. The over-reliance on CGI, being completely enamored by all these new technologies that are available, like a kid in a candy store. But I also think a lot of the over-reliance on CGI was purely for the fact that he was so pushed for time that he couldn't create all of the props and the makeup, and didn't have time to have people sitting in a makeup chair for 9 to 10 hours or however long it was, putting all these prosthetics on and having to stop the shoot and cool everyone down. They had no time, and it was like, go, 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 I'll CGI it. You know, they didn't have conceptual ideas down for characters. They shot the film with a character looking a certain way, then Peter Jackson changed his mind and was like, I don't like that appearance. They couldn't go back and refilm it with a new costume. They had to just paste CGI over the top of it, and now Azog has gone from a practical character of an actor in makeup to a CGI character. So hopefully with this one, with 2026, and it's still in early development, and it is only one film, I hope they give Andy Serkis the appropriate amount of planning time that he needs, where he can shoot on location in New Zealand. He can have, you know, if there's going to be orcs in it and everything like that, he can have them all in makeup. Or are they going to keep it with that modern aesthetic of the Hobbit trilogy? I don't know. I like to think that Peter Jackson, if he could do The Hobbit again, probably would use more practical stuff, given the chance, and I hope that Andy Serkis follows suit with that. but he has done big budget CGI films as well. The second unit director on the Hobbit films, but also stuff like Venom. So I just hope that visually it looks more akin to the Lord of the Rings, in that this is taking place directly during the time of the Lord of the Rings. Whereas the Hobbit, it was 60 years before. You could argue that it's a more whimsical kids book, so the brighter saturation and the more wacky cartoony characters fits the tone of the book, even though they were trying to make it more in line with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Hobbit was a confused mess, of course it was, and I've talked ad nauseum about that, but yeah, I like to think that this could be a bit more grounded, and they could have learnt from their mistakes and the misgivings from the Hobbit trilogy to work on these ones, maybe. JX says, did you watch the fan film The Hunt for Gollum? I've watched bits of it. I don't know if I've ever watched the whole thing, and they must be like, shit, the people that made that fan film right now. I remember it being pretty good, though. For a fan film, I thought the costumes were pretty decent. And yeah, it was very faithful as far as I remember to the source material. It was cool for a fan project. Yeah, it's kind of like the golden age of those fan films, isn't it, really? JX Editor says, Vigo said around the time of The Hobbit that he would be willing to play the character again if there was more to actually do with the character. Well, all that the character's really doing is looking for Gollum in this. And I will say, like, he does apprehend Gollum. He is successful in his mission, and he bags Gollum around the dead marshes. And if you look at the map, and I wish I could move myself out of the way now, he bags him at the dead marshes in a bag and marches him by himself to the woodland realm. To quote Gimli, that is no short distance. And Aragorn did it himself. He went over mountain ranges and hills. I think, does he go over the Misty Mountains too? I actually can't remember to get to the woodland realm, but he travelled a long distance. I think Nerd of the Rings has got a video on the complete travels of Aragorn, and it's explained in there, so give that video a watch. Toby says, I pray that they don't shoot this in 48 frames per second in 3D like The Hobbit. Hope they learned their lesson there, or at least allow themselves another prep time to make a decent movie. I agree, and it's... 3D is a very strange thing with movie, and you can see it through the history of cinema, really. With ebbs and flows, it comes and goes all the time. You had the big 3D boom of like 2009, 2010 kind of time with Avatar, which kicked everything off, and around that time everything had to be, you know, 3D and higher frame rate and things like that. And with The Hobbit coming out in, I think it was 2012, wasn't it? I think the first Hobbit film came out. It was still very much a carryover of that, and it was this 48 frame thing is going to be the future. You know, did James Cameron say that Avatar 2 or 3 or whatever, 3, 4, 5 is all going to be shot in 60 frames a second or some nonsense like that? So it was all swirling around during that time, and it really didn't work. You know, I like my film grain. I like my 24 frames a second. There's a reason why that's lasted as long as it has. That is what we know as film, and I think that works. So when everything's like really digital and super cleaned up and super fluid, it doesn't make it feels less like a film. It feels like less like you're watching a film, and it feels like you're watching like a theatrical play in person. And the lines of cinema and, you know, like makeup and stuff, is you can tell that it's makeup, and it ceases to be a character and you're saying, oh, that's an actor in makeup. The way they move just feels very real time and doesn't feel filmic. And yeah, I went to see The Desolation of Smaug in the higher frame rate just to give it a try, and I really wasn't a fan of it, to be honest. Seaward Man says, where are those Funko Pops? They're on my shelf at the moment. So I've got my Fellowship of the Ring gift set. I've got like a little stack of shelves there. I've got my Fellowship of the Ring gift set with my Frodo Baggins Chase Pop and the VHS cassette of Lord of the Rings next to it. Then on the shelf below, I've got my Two Towers gift set with the Two Towers VHS and the King Theoden Pop, RIP to Bernard Hill as well. I think I mentioned this already to some people, but I was at Liverpool Comic Con this weekend just gone, and he was supposed to be there. And he dropped out on the Friday, and on the Sunday the news broke. It was heartbreaking. I went to see the Lord of the Rings panel. They had the 4 Hobbits and Orlando Bloom there, but Orlando Bloom had to leave halfway through to get a flight back to the States. And the 4 Hobbits did a really nice, touching tribute to Bernard Hill at the end, which was it was a pleasure to be there and to witness that. And it kind of all brought it home to me a little bit there. And then on the next shelf, I've got my Return of the King gift set with my Return of the King VHS and my limited edition Frodo holding the ring pop. So yeah, I'm not exactly happy with that layout of stuff, but it gets it on a shelf and it's there for right now. So yeah, as the collection continues to expand, which is what we want. Toby says Warner Brothers better leave the creatives alone here. We don't require another love triangle. I'm with you, but you know, if they get Vigo in there, I guarantee they're going to get Arwen in there, because you have to think about modern movie sensibilities now. And I'm not saying I agree with it, but we're seeing it with the Rings of Power to a detrimental effect, and everyone's ragging on that show for good reason. But the strong, independent female character, you know, everything has to have that now, and agendas and messages being pushed in the Rings of Power and a lot of other things as well. And the interview that Peter Jackson did years and years ago when he did The Lord of the Rings, and he said, we didn't want to put our own baggage, we didn't want to bring our own baggage to the story and tell our own message. We just wanted to tell the message of Tolkien and from what's in that book. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's essentially what he was saying in his interview. And I hope they do the same, because we did see those things creep in with Warner Brothers, didn't we? Saying, oh, we need a romance in there. Let's get that whole Tauriel and Killy thing going, and the love triangle with Legolas in there as well. Probably making the dwarves hot, you know, the main dwarves like Killy, Philly and Thorin, when initially they were under heavy makeup and prosthetics and looked a lot more dwarven than they do in the final film. The fact that it was dragged out to a trilogy rather than 2 films, whether that was a decision by the studio, which I expect it was, but I think also Peter Jackson was like, look, I have no time to get this Battle of the Five Armies done. I can't plan a battle and shoot a battle and get this film done in the time frame that you've given me. So let's push that film back to next year. I'm going to cobble together some kind of climax for the second movie to give me just enough headspace to think about how I'm going to put that third film together. So yeah, let the creatives be creatives. 100% I agree with that. Too creative though, and you get Peter Jackson saying, yeah, Radagast the Brown should have bird shit in his hair and be on a bunny sleigh, and you know, a lot of the questionable decisions and wacky shit from The Hobbit. For example, with the extended edition of Battle of the Five Armies, I don't see that being a Warner Brothers studio note that Alfred will dress in drag, fill his bosom full of coin, climb into a catapult on the back of a dead troll, a coin will fall out of his bosom, activating the mechanism, the lever, which will catapult him into the mouth of a troll, which will choke the troll and also kill him in the process. I don't see that being like a memo written by Warner Brothers. That is pure, unadulterated Peter Jackson. And yeah, let the creatives be creative, but sometimes you gotta veto some awful shit. Sorry. And Andy Serkis is going to be that one to veto that now that he's in the director's chair for this. So we'll see what he brings to the table. Toby says, if they keep the idea simple and the scope of the story grounded, then I'll be very excited to see this. I'm really just questioning at the moment how this is going to fit into the movie continuity. With Andy Serkis coming back as Gollum, that tells me, right, they definitely want this to be taken seriously and to fit very nicely into what we've seen in the pre-established films. But I just don't see how you can tell that story without Gandalf and Aragorn. And if they do have Gandalf and Aragorn, how are they going to go about it? Because you're expecting Ian McKellen, you're expecting Viggo Mortensen. If they're too old or they don't want to come back for it and you've got to recast, well, that just cheapens the whole film to me, and it'll be a huge shake-up, because when you think Gandalf, you think of Ian McKellen. Well, I do anyway. You know, some people might say, oh, I hear the voice from the radio play, or, you know, the animated Gandalf or whatnot. But Ian McKellen has been Gandalf for 2 goddamn trilogies now. And if this is meant to take place in those films, then they're the characters that they have to be. And if they don't want to return for it, and you don't have Gandalf and Aragorn in the movie, then I don't see how you can do the hunt for Gollum and tell it accurately, or, you know, who's hunting Gollum then? What's the point of the story? What's the point in making this film? Warner Brothers did say they wanted to have a focus on the spin-off films in the life of Gandalf, Aragorn and Gollum, and they've got their wish because all 3 of those characters feature very heavily in the hunt for Gollum. So I would read that it would stand to reason that they are coming back in whatever respect that is. And, you know, mentioning tying those 2 trilogies together, you do have the opportunity to have people like Thranduil return, Legolas coming back again if you want him, Liv Tyler and Hugo Weaving in the backdrop of the film, and potentially Sauron and the Ringwraith. So there's a lot of familiar iconography there. It's familiar enough, but it also does offer you the opportunity to see some new locations and see this hunt for Gollum unfold on screen. Toby says, Rings of what? Power who? Never even heard of this Lord Amazon you speak of. Wise words, my friend. But season 2 is on the way, and I will have reviews for it. I've been talking to Everything in Middle-earth, and we're hopefully getting something together. We're getting the party back together again for that one, which will be great, because it was a blast doing the reviews with him last time, and I really, really hope he can be a part of season 2 as well. Toby says, Radagast is my boy, quit hating. Hey, I like Radagast. I just don't like... I like the actor who played Radagast. I just don't like how they did Radagast in the movies. JX says, don't diss the Ruskabel rabbits. Toby, they saved Gandalf's sorry ass. The rabbits were the true heroes. It's true. They were. Rescued him from Dol Guldur. I don't know if there's much else I can say on this, to be honest. I guess another question is, will Howard Shore return to do the music? It would be great if he did. I wasn't too keen on Bear McCreary's score for the Rings of Power, and I don't blame him. He's a fantastic composer. I love the stuff he did with the God of War games. My God. Incredible composer on those games, and I think if he'd have been presented with some actually good stuff for the Rings of Power, I think he could have done very well. So with Howard Shore coming back for, you know, well, doing the Lord of the Rings and doing the Hobbit, I think it stands to reason that he'd be doing the music for this one. I'm pretty sure, hasn't he been announced that he's doing the music for War of the Rohirrim? I would expect, which means we're going to hear that Rohan theme again, which is going to be great. Oh, no. Music by Stephen Gallagher. And there's no hyperlink on his name, so I can't click it. So potentially no Howard Shore. I would expect that they're probably going to use some of his themes. The fact that they've mentioned that they're shooting it in New Zealand, I think that's very important as well. And hopefully they showcase New Zealand a lot better than the Rings of Power did, which was also shot in New Zealand, or at least season 1 was shot in New Zealand. And it just felt like it was done on a cheap soundstage half the time. I really don't know where the money for that show went, because it looks abysmal. Costumes look awful. The set design, staging looks terrible. The costumes are so fucking bad. Costumes were so awful in that. Toby says, I thought his score was fantastic. It's just that thematically it didn't work within the show, because the show is a street myth, a fever dream. Yeah. And he's a phenomenal composer, Bear McCreary. Really, really gifted composer. Probably one of the best modern day composers, I would say. And as I mentioned, I'm a huge God of War fan, and his score for God of War and God of War Ragnarok were tremendous, and the leitmotifs that were built and the new themes that were presented was great. But yeah, if you're given shit, I guess it doesn't really inspire you as much as a creative, and it shows. I'm probably going to have to round it off here, guys, because it's just gone 1 in the morning and I need to be up at 8 o'clock for work. So yeah, I just wanted to jump on for this thing. I think I did put on a community post earlier that I'd probably be going live over this weekend. But then I just, I was practicing guitar and I thought, I kind of feel like talking about Lord of the Rings right now and just kind of getting this news out there and discussing it a little bit and getting my opinions across. I'm very conscious that there is a giant Fellowship of the Ring hole in the wall right there. That poster will be going up very, very shortly. I took it with me to Comic-Con and it's still in the poster tube, so I've just been lazy and I haven't had time to get it back up on the wall. But the trilogy will be reunited and will be completed next live stream, hopefully. Toby Houston says, Ragnarok was great, a man of good taste. Yeah, I mean, it was a tremendous game. I do think that it would have been better paced out as a trilogy rather than cramming it into 2 games. There was a lot of story. I think they did it very well, but I think it could have been better paced out over a trilogy a little bit more. But it was still a great game. I still haven't finished all of the side quests in that game, and then they've had the DLC come out as well, the Greek mythology stuff, and I'm dying to play it. Hopefully, over the terms, like, I'll get a little bit more free time, and I'd love to jump back into that game and just finish everything off to say I've completed it fully. Seaward Man says, do a live stream of it so it's shown. I mean, I could do. I mean, it would just be me putting a poster back up on the wall, and you can see me struggle trying to line up the little nail with the little backing part of the frame and trying to get it on properly. I do want to try and buy some more United Cutlery swords at some point, actually. I've been long overdue. The last one that I had was the Mace of Sauron, I think it was. I think that was the last one that I had. I've been in contact with someone who's selling Theoden's sword, Herogrim, which would be... Actually, that might be quite nice to get next, so, with Bernard Hill and everything that's happened. I think it'd be nice to start getting some Rohan weapons because they're gorgeous. Like, they're a beautiful design. The Rohan ones they've got at the moment, they've got Herogrim, which is King Theoden's sword. They've got Guthwine, Eomer's sword. They've got a scabbard for Guthwine. There's the sword of Eowyn, and then they also released the sword of Theodred, which is exactly the identical design of Eowyn's sword, but it's a different colour. Eowyn's sword is like a kind of reddy maroon kind of colour, and Theodred's is green. So, and then they've done the spear of Éomer, but that's not metal. It's like resin again, and it's painted to look like metal. But I think it's a shame that it's not. And I think recently they've released Aiglos, which is Gil-galad's spear, which is a beautiful design, but again, resin, not metal. So I'm kind of hesitant to buy those ones. They do look nice, they look the part, but I'm just like, just make it out of metal. I think there's a Rohirrim axe that was created as well. And there's the helmets, but I don't really collect the helmets. So yeah, a lot of Rohirrim stuff that I need to start collecting. Toby says, random quick question. Which do you prefer, Doom Part 1 or Part 2? Ooh, that is a very, very good question. It's complicated. I think probably overall I preferred 2 because it felt like more stuff was happening. I do like the setup in Doom Part 1 though, and I think Doom Part 1 has my favourite set piece where the spice miner malfunctions and the worm's on the way and they have to try and rescue all the people out of there. I really like that scene. I think that was done well. So I'd probably say Doom Part 2, but I do have a lot of problems with what they've chosen to do with the story, deviating from the source material, and also, yeah, like the ending just felt very rushed to me, and like it wasn't paced out well. You know what, if I watched them again, I might say 1. I think 1 was paced a lot better and didn't feel as rushed, but I just felt there was more going on, and like the Fade Routher stuff, and kind of all comes to a head, doesn't it, in Part 2, so maybe that's why it's on my mind. But yeah, I don't see me being inclined to watch the Dune films again anytime soon. I don't really have like a deep connection to them or emotional stake in them. you know, so I kind of watched them and was like, oh, okay. I'll probably watch them again before Dune Messiah comes out, but I don't see me rushing back to watch them anytime soon. Toby says, for what it's worth, part 2 was a lot to take in. Still fantastic, but yeah, part 1 was just so immersive. Yeah, no, I'll agree with that, 100%. Yeah, okay, I think that'll do it. So we've just hit an hour, so I wanted to keep this relatively short. But yeah, thank you to everyone tuning in tonight. I thought it was just going to be me talking to a camera, but it's nice to know that some people are still up and hear me whittle on about Middle-earth. It's always a pleasure talking Middle-earth. Yeah, this is my Bible. This is me. Everything you see before you know, this keeps me going. So I love talking about it, and I love theorizing about it. And here's to hopes for the Lord of the Rings cinematic future. And hopefully they don't run it into the ground too much like every other franchise, looking at Disney with Star Wars, for example. But anyway, thank you very much to everyone that's tuned in and kept the conversation going. I will be live again on Monday with Dale for another Disney review, continuing the retrospective. And yeah, if any more Middle-earth news crops up, or I feel so inclined to jump on like this, I will do exactly that. So have a good night, everyone. Good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you're tuning in from, and I will catch you guys